Heeter is out to create a wild revolution in the workplace. Though her first vocation is as a wilderness guide, she's not a stranger to the meeting world. She's a regular speaker at MPI events starting back in 2001. She has led and worked with a diverse array of teams, both canine and human, helping us recognize that leadership and teamwork doesn't have to be so complicated. Her mantra: wild leadership, compassionate presence, and a daring authenticity. Welcome, Chris, and her special guest Summit to the Illuminate Project podcast. Oh my gosh, we have a special guest. I love it.
That's awesome.
See how long he stays. It's mighty hot to be on the leather couch right now, but he's going to stick with us for a little while at least.
Oh, that's great. And what is our special guest today?
Our special guest is Summit. He's named after Pat Summitt, the women's basketball coach from Tennessee, who died way too young of early onset Alzheimer's. So his name to keep her story alive.
Oh, that's awesome. This is not going so well because we've already bored your companion and is already sleeping. So
no, that's good news actually. Otherwise he leaves. So he'll just listen calmly. This is his job, is to bring peace and calm as we have to, converse and things from far away. This is his main job. And when I've done speaking, especially throughout the pandemic, and people are all so stressed out, right? Yeah. I feel like all I have to really do is just go, just look at him for a while. You'll feel better.
I do feel better already.
Right? It's his magic. It's his thing.
And now, how many of before the pandemic, how many of your sessions actually involved bringing dogs on stage? Was it pretty common practice?
Well, I had to be within driving distance for starters, because it's hard to fly with dogs. And then he really is the understudy of the one that was my speaking companion superstar that would just go on stage, and she'd be like looking around. I'd tell her story and she'd pick who she'd go be with and weave to that person and sleep on their feet. And inevitably that person would come back up to me at the end of the session in tears because they really needed her. Yeah. He's more of an all-around goofball, love you all kind of guy. So he hasn't had as many speaking opportunities because he will love you to the point of jumping up. So I have to have a handler with me when he comes along so he doesn't jump on anybody.
And I know that was making headways before the pandemic in the conference industry of bringing therapy dogs to sessions. Right. And I'm curious now, does that ramp up even more? Does that open up to other animals? Like, what's that going to look like post-pandemic?
I think that's a really good question and worth pursuing. Mm-hmm. Four-leggeds are really, really helpful in so many ways.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Great. Yeah. I know I went back to see my folks mostly for the dogs. They know. I told them, I was like, I just really need to hang out with the dogs.
Mary France, your parents listen to this, right?
I'm going to say, you might want to edit that part out.
I think
they don't listen. This will be a test. We'll see.
Yeah, now you'll know.
I'll know for sure. They're just placating me.
We've talked to a few other professional speakers in our previous episodes, and something that always comes up is obviously speaking of changing your direction, no more so than a professional speaker that's used to being at live events. So what's maybe the number one takeaway you've taken from all of this in the last 18 months with regards to speaking and your relationship with your companions there?
Well, I would say, for me, I had to take my time with this. I think that speaking virtually is an entirely different skill set than speaking face-to-face. So I did not want to rush into it, assuming I could do it anywhere as well as I could speak face-to-face. So I took my time. I went out to my garden and spent a good bit of time planting and pulling weeds and just wondering, would wild translate? Because much of what I speak about does not encourage people to hang out with electronics, right? So how can this be? But after taking some time, I realized that probably more than ever, there's a need for what I say is wild. And then when I figured I could sit on the floor so that my dog could be on the couch and you could at least interact with him, it started to come together. So I've gotten great responses in terms of, I believe so much in story, right? And so that's what we need. We've got to have something engaging enough that people will not be tempted to be doing their dishes while they're half listening, right? I had to figure out, can I do this in a way that keeps you paying attention and listening and engaging with me, and coming up with what we call chat storms, right? So I'm like, okay, type your word, but don't hit send yet. And we do it all at once and we get a flood of wild words or whatever we're talking about. So it's been a challenge, but good for me to stay flexible and learning just like everybody else. And the guiding part of my business had to change a lot. I mean, I make my living by gatherings, right? Like you guys.
Yeah.
So we either come together at conferences or small groups coming dog sledding or canoeing, none of which was going to work. So it's taken a lot of shifting and creativity, like all of us. And feel like I'm probably better for it. I'm eager to take what I've learned back to face-to-face conferences and see what's shifted in me.
Yeah.
But it's been a journey for sure.
Well, just think of how much better we're all going to be in a year or two from now when this is a thing of the past and we're meeting again in person. It's just going to be, I'm excited to see all the changes that are going to occur, and it's going to be for the better. We've talked about that at length on this podcast, that it will be for the better in the long run, but let's just get there. We're almost there.
Right. And the deep appreciation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Deep appreciation. Never, ever take it for granted again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The word that keeps coming back to me is intention. Like being really intentional. And I like what you're saying. I love what you just described, because I mean, somebody hopping in on this watching it on YouTube will think, oh, this looks really nice. But every single element of your background, having the dog, the way you're sitting, and we do the same thing. Yeah. It's all very intentional. It's nothing, none of this is by surprise. We might look very casual,
right?
But it's not haphazard, right? We're doing things in a very intentional way. And I hope that's the thing that gets translated back in person. I think maybe along the way, we kind of lost the intention behind it. It was just more, it was becoming a little more like, okay, 6 rounds and tables and centerpieces. And we maybe lost, not always, I think what a lot of people did in certain elements, but we lost kind of being consistent with being really intentional. So when we meet back in person, it's going to be very intentional. We're going to make sure it's worth your while to displace yourself and put yourself at risk potentially, right? Spend the money, pay the gas to get there, right?
Right.
And Mary Frances is an event design geek, so I'm surprised you did not use that word through all of that, but very clearly that's what it's all about.
I'm coming out with new words. Yes, I'm reinventing it. See?
Excellent.
Okay, great.
My thought when I agreed to my first virtual one was what we lost in terms of the intimacy of being face to face. We have gained, like you're saying, the ability to, peek around and see each other's where they live and stuff. So I have always urged people to have their cameras on and to not have some photograph background. I get if some people just feel better that way, but it's like the intimacy we gain is this and is that, right? Yeah. I want it to feel like you're sitting in my living room with me.
Right. Now, Chris, if you've listened to any of our podcasts, we've got a segment called Crazy Eights. I'm going to start things off with number 1. What time do you typically get up?
Get up or wake up?
I like that. Give me both.
Okay, I'm usually awake by 5. I try to stay in bed till 6.
Okay.
It's a struggle.
It is a struggle. It's light out. The birds are singing by 5.
Yeah.
Listen, everybody we've asked, I went back into our catalog for season 2. They're all saying like 5 a.m. It's like crazy o'clock for me.
Yeah. Really?
It's so consistent.
That is funny. Well, it's at least in the summertime. That's when it's light out. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2, plans or no plans?
No plans.
No surprise. Live to eat or eat to live?
Oh man, that's hard. I guess you don't get to say both.
Well, you can, but you have to explain yourself.
Eat to live.
Okay. Personal trainer or personal chef?
Personal trainer.
Okay. What sense do you rely on the most of the 5 senses?
I'm going to guess gut isn't one of the senses you're talking about.
No, but we've had people get creative with this. Keep in mind, we are a creative podcast. So
right.
Yeah, you have to answer what's real. If your gut is the 6th sense that we didn't name, then go for it.
That's the part that, I got to listen to that sort of inner sense.
Going back to the intentional component. This is all intentional. Truth or dare?
Truth.
And your crazy 8, Chris, you're trapped on a desert island. Do you want dogs or humans with you?
Oh, wow, you guys. Desert. Oh, man.
Isn't that a tough one?
That is it. Do you see how close that is?
I'm going to give you a note here. Give us one reason why dogs, one reason why humans.
Yeah.
Well, I could say humans because I'm going to anticipate I will meet some really cool animals on that island.
Fair.
And get my dose of fur that is essential to my life.
Okay.
But that's how close it was.
Okay. Great.
I'm surprised. I thought it was going to be dogs all the way.
It's so close, but I don't know. I think with a human, I might figure out how to get off that island.
Okay.
Fair. Yeah, the dog wasn't going to help you with that.
Not so much.
And the last one, simply, are you surviving or thriving in the status quo?
I'm thriving.
Okay, good.
Yep.
And we've had some guests say kind of both, so there is no right or wrong answer to that. But
no, I'll tell you that one of the many things I've had to shift and adjust and move toward is when the speaking really dropped from what it typically is for me.
Yeah.
Well, do I want to try to scramble and scrape and find if I can see if I can find some more virtual speaking, or would I rather lean into the other part of my life, which is guiding trips?
Yeah.
So I'd rather be in a canoe, frankly, than sitting in front of a computer all this time. Yeah. So in the late spring or early spring, I got thinking about, I've thought so much about the pandemic and particularly the healthcare workers and what they continue to go through, but certainly what they have been through, the personal risks, all of it. Yeah. And I got to do, is this okay to talk about now?
Yeah,
of course, please. Yeah, we want to hear about it.
So last March, I was supposed to speak in New Orleans to a group of hospital executives from all over the country. And they obviously postponed it, and finally said, there's no way that we're going to be able to meet a year ago March, right? So they asked if I would do a video, just a little short one. So I kind of made some notes, and my last line in my notes was my wish for you. And I figured whatever came to me at the time, I would just say it. So what I ended up saying was something, not this exactly, but something like, my wish for you, whether this is at your doorstep or coming for you, when this pandemic eases, you have a soft place to land. That there are those of us to hold you while you sigh and cry and grieve and learn to laugh again. My wish for you is a soft place to land. So I said that, not thinking much of it, but it just rattled around in me for the whole year. Yeah. So at the end of around March, I got thinking about, well, what can I do? And I got thinking, so anyway, long story, a little bit shorter, I created what I called Healing the Healers Canoe Days. And this was open to any healthcare workers, priority toward if they were really impacted by COVID, but not specifically so because everyone was. Yeah. And get them out on the river for a day and just let them have that soft place to land and be in nature and exhale and have everything. All they have to do is show up. And the food, everything custom to whatever their dietary needs are, and get them out. And then I thought, well, it doesn't feel right to charge them for that, which is how I usually run my trips. So I go, what do I do about that? So I figured out a GoFundMe site, and I got some foundations to help so that it was provided for them.
Wow.
Right. That's awesome.
And I've done 6 so far. There's 2 more to go, and they have just been amazing. And so powerful and peaceful both.
Right.
It's like so fulfilling too, to feel like you can, you're not a healthcare worker yourself, or, so many times during this pandemic, or for numerous reasons, I think we all felt so helpless, helpless to, government directives and not understanding and stay at home, but then you're not doing anything and you just feel like this languish, right? Which was this like popular term that came out, languishing. Like, what do we do? Like, what's the purpose? So it's super, I'm really amazed at how you could turn that into something to give back in a really significant way. It's really inspiring. Wow. I love it.
It's been so good for me too, for the sense of purpose to really finally get to do something that feels helpful. And one of the funnest parts is when they first come and I tell them the story about the soft place to land. Yeah. And then I just reiterate, I said, the reason you're standing here free of charge is that there are a couple hundred people who don't know you, but they see you and they want to say thank you. And so they have sent money so that you can have this experience. They get a free parking pass for state parks in Minnesota here for a full year, because I want to have ways that they get to carry it forward with just one big day. Yeah. And there's never a dry eye when I talk about the kindness of strangers and people wanting to say thank you. So it's been
there's barely a dry eye here.
Yeah, I mean that's
crying might happen.
And what I love is that you identified that I'm a professional speaker, yet that's not what I'm going to do in this, and you completely went a different route, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to make money off this or how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure it out because it's the right thing to do. And it's just, I think we've had a lot of conversations with people that have recognized that, and in a normal scenario of a normal day life, you wouldn't have done that, right? It's kind of made it forced us to make these interesting decisions. But something we talked a lot about on our last podcast, actually, we were how can you not smile,
honestly,
and laugh at that?
I mean, it's just the best. You did this for our keynote, our virtual keynote in February, and you had I don't think it was Summit. I think it was Summit. Okay. Oh my goodness. But I mean, what a ham.
Right.
He knows it too.
Oh, that's exactly the right word.
I think someone's got a question. His hand's up. What do you want
Yes,
to say?
yes.
Yeah, I'd like to intervene.
What I was just going to spin off on that is we've talked about, and again, a couple of podcasts, especially the last one, about reconnecting to nature during COVID and how much nature has saved a lot of people. And what I'm curious about is I've always enjoyed nature. It's always been part of my vacations and trips.
Well, he's a little mountaineer, this one. I mean, he'd rather be climbing a mountain any day than hanging out with us doing a podcast.
Well,
I'll tell you that right now.
Going into a hotel and wearing a suit, but that's my career. My passion is the mountains. But when I think about that, do you think, honestly, that after 2 years pass, are people still going to fall in love with those places they've discovered that, they've gone out to nature, or are they just going to fall back to those old routines of kind of, I don't know, trying to, work the 9 to 5, go back to the big cities and not really start to explore nature as much?
In Quebec, we call it boulot, métro, dodo, which means work, metro, sleep.
Right.
That's just painful to hear.
Yeah. And I guess you've always been, obviously canoeing and outdoors is very important to you, but what do you think for the average citizen that maybe is getting out to nature a lot more?
I think I'd throw the question back, just like we're talking about with events, this intentionality, and I've heard, Marie-France, at least I heard you say, we're not going back, right? We're going to be more intentional now about all this stuff. So with that same confidence, I suspect
if I say it loud enough, it'll happen.
Right. Well, and I can't decide what I hope on that, to be honest, because selfishly the parks and like the boundary waters and stuff where I go are just crammed with people, and we need to adjust some things if it's going to stay this popular. We've got to figure out better permit systems so it's not so crowded out there. But that's a good problem to have. My hope is that it stays because we're going to protect what we love. And
yes, I was going to say, I hope that translates into some sort of awareness and advocacy too, right?
Right. Climate change is upon us, and there's no going back on that one. So I think a connection to nature is vital so that people will notice more, like you say, and protect what we love.
Well, I think the message is there. If you are going to go enjoy it, don't, respect it and enjoy it the right way. And
well, it's weird, because we went from, and I do think the events industry and tourism industry, because they're interlinked, had something to do with it. But, we talked, there was a big crisis of over tourism in all these places, right?
Yeah. And
when the pandemic hit, like Rome was empty, like it hadn't been empty in 40 years, like what a shocker. Right. And now it's funny how, then we've invaded all the green spaces now. But again, like, let's find some balance. It's like a pendulum. It's going from one extreme to the other. Maybe we can find a little equilibrium. But
well, at least in the States, you can't find vegetable seeds, right? Because everybody decided to do a garden, which is great. We just need to figure that out, right? In terms of the supply and whatever. But I'm really glad I had my seeds saved, because it was hard to find the stuff I didn't have.
Oh, goodness. So we want to thank you for listening to our podcast. And if you like what you hear, you might even like TIPP Talks.
TIPP Talks is a custom podcast tailored to your event.
And a great way to highlight your speakers before your event actually starts.
And we'd love to help you figure all that out and make your event an even better ROI experience for your sponsors and your participants. So if you want to hear more, you can check us out on our website at switchidea.co. Well, and you kind of touched on this earlier, and I wanted to come back to it because I think it's kind of the epicenter of it all. And it's this, the word wild that you use. And I wanted to hear more. I know a little bit about it already, of course, but especially for Ryan's sake and our audience, I wanted to learn a little more. I wanted to hear a little more about what wild means to you, which I think is a really nice, it's a nice mantra to keep thinking about.
It is, and it sure fits the times, just like you all. It's a happy coincidence, I suppose. But if we're not wild coming out of the pandemic, I think we're in big trouble. Wild to me, here's my thing. Wild is who you are, right? It's who you are at your core. There's nothing to fix or improve or reach for. It's just you, beautiful, messy, natural, unique you. So being wild is having the courage to bring the gift of all of who you are to all of what you do. So when we take that into a corporate setting, or when we apply that to leadership or teamwork or inspired inclusion is what I like to call it, it's all about weeding through all the ways we put things on it's like you're talking about, Ryan, with the stuff behind us, right? It's like kind of getting that off to the side and showing up with who we are, and everybody benefits. And it's not easy. It's not easy to show up wild, and to be honest, it's not easy to be fully welcoming of wild. We think we are. Oh, sure, we're a welcoming organization or whatever, but are you really? Well, have you really thought about what that means to move from what I call it welcoming, to wildly welcoming, where you're really, truly embracing and allowing people to show up with who they are? Because some of them, you're not going to like their traits, Can we do it anyway, so that people don't have to spend their energy pretzeling and changing and not being who they are? That's a lot of wasted energy instead of just figuring it out together.
I've seen this a lot in some of the leadership styles I've noticed that have kind of risen to the top in the last year. Is like, you've had no choice but to be yourself and lead, on a more human element, and put the actual work aside and be more flexible with people's family lives, and those who have kids that aren't in school, and those that are struggling with mental health. It's like, what a wake up call for all those leaders out there to really change your style. If you're not putting empathy at the top, then people aren't going to want to work for you anymore. So it's going to really change the leadership style, which is nice.
Yeah. And I think it's funny. I went to my first in-person event last week, which is,
and she was very excited. We have many selfies of Mary France at this event. Very many selfies.
The guy, I was sitting at a table with 4 because of the protocols, and the guy who was there was a freelancer for Tourism Montreal. He was there to kind of work, and I just like the whole time. I'm like, at one point, I was like, I'm very excited. This is happening. I mean, this is just what's happening. So you will listen to me, and we will talk, and I will enjoy all this free socializing with someone I don't even know.
Right.
It was.
It's almost like networking now is going to be so much easier. Oh,
yeah.
What
I was going with that though, because I was a little nervous at first before I got there, but I knew I would enjoy it once I got there. But I was a little nervous. It's just been so long, and it's like I'm a muscle to flex, talking to strangers. But what I notice in our industry a lot is, I think at some level we all kind of put on a mask, and we call it different things. And I do it. I call it my game face. There's sometimes like you're really tired in the day and you're like, okay, and you like take a few pumps. You're like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And then you do it, and you have kind of your game face on, and it's your polished professional. I'm doing great. My life is fabulous, kind of and schmoozing kind of thing that you do. And and I think it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of those barriers went down when we were because you're in my home. I'm in your home right now, kind of theoretically through the internet waves, and I just hope that we don't lose that. I hope we don't lose that authenticity, or we don't, those masks don't go back on.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting to even see who comes back and who figures out they can work better remotely. I mean, there's so much to figure out now. It's going to be fascinating.
People don't want to do that networking anymore. That's just not going to be their style of wanting to.
Right. And for some they will and some they won't. And then what do you do with a team that's half remote and half face-to-face? That's going to be really interesting. How do you hold meetings? How do you get enough communication happening? It's going to be rich, I think, and exciting and challenging.
Yeah.
But to me, if we're not showing up wild, where we really speak up about what we need to do our best work.
Yeah.
And
definitely going to test
that.
And Chris, I was going to ask you, on that note, knowing what you were speaking about before the pandemic and your materials and your sessions, are those going to see a drastic change after, or are they still, like you said, they're kind of more applicable than ever? But have you thought about, when you go back, and maybe you already are, we're a little behind you up here in Canada, but are you going back with whole new topics, or are you just tweaking them, or is it still fully applicable?
Both. It's applicable. And in my prep for things I've got a series, probably 6 or 7 now, booked that are fingers crossed face to face. So that will be fun. He sighs. He's like, you mean you'll leave me with someone else?
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, baby. I'm creating a new topic because it's what in my prep calls, it's what's coming up. I'm calling it Come Back Wild.
Great.
And it's all about what we're talking about here. Let's not lose all the lessons that are sitting here in front of us.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? And the other piece for me, that's just my own personal growth. I've talked about being wild for a long time now, like 20 years or plus. on stage, and I continue to learn what that means in my life, and what am I saying exactly when I'm speaking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and I'm saying show up wild. I'm learning more, honestly, since George Floyd about, well, wait a minute. Do we mean it? When we say, yeah, I'm a wild leader, I want everybody to show up. How Black do you want the Black people to be?
Yeah.
Right? How uncomfortable are we willing to be as a whole, all of us, to allow people to show up with their culture and their style? And, do you really mean it when I talk about my girlfriend and my partner and I say she, or is that going to make you like not want to share? Right? I mean, how willing are we to be welcoming? And so it's teaching me a lot. And I feel on sort of a growing edge right now about, so what does wild really mean in the world of diversity? And what do I have to say about that as I'm learning and growing?
It's definitely challenging. I think it's challenging for all of us because it's just not been at the forefront of our conversations. We didn't have to dive too deep, and I think we're really having to face it in a much more in your face kind of way. Yes.
It's an excellent thing. And I've spoke primarily from the dominant culture mindset, right?
Yeah.
It's, oh, come on, everybody just be yourself. And I'm digging deep about what do I mean by that? And how do I help my clients and my audiences get more real about what that looks like and what isn't really welcoming?
Yeah. And, I think, and this applies to what we're talking about here, but it also applies to being wild, I think, and being resilient. And resiliency, which is really like at the core of everything we've been doing. And that's kind of how I take the wild definition a little bit, is just how, you think about the wild, you think about the outdoors, you think about surviving and resiliency and keep going. But it's about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes, indeed.
And I've had that and that includes all aspects, including conversations about diversity at a level that we've never had before. But with my team too, a lot of people are uncomfortable not knowing how things work if they don't have the whole recipe for the cake,
Yeah.
We do not have the recipe, guys. We're going to have to try and put in some ingredients and see if it works out. And I know, for my team, it's tough, but I had to kind of say, look, you're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to just have to get comfortable with that. It's what's going to happen.
That's absolutely right. And to just name it and be out there and honest about it. Even that statement helps people calm down.
Yeah, acknowledge it.
To have the leader name it like that makes a huge difference. Just to say, I get it. I'm uncomfortable too. And here we are. And we're going to just find our way together.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's amazing.
Chris, this has been a special 30 minutes speaking with you and Summit, of course. I've enjoyed, I think back to San Francisco. I saw your session. It was awesome. But I'm excited now to come in and hear, your response post the pandemic. And I think your audiences are really going to gravitate to you and what your message and the wild and everything else. I think you've got a good, successful few years still ahead of you here to bounce back on this thing.
Yeah,
so,
we're so lucky to have you to be able to, anyways, share this message. I think it's super important. I love it.
Well, it's such fun. And I mean, I got it sort of ace in the hole by being able to talk about sled dogs, right? I mean, who doesn't really want to hear those stories and watch those videos? So I have to admit, it's kind of an easy way in, and then where I take it from there. But I appreciate it. I appreciate a lot what you guys are doing. I just think it's so important and interesting, right? To be shaking it up and just.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we get to meet people like you or talk to people like you, which has kind of that's kind of our little sneaky easing in kind of thing.
Right?
We get guests like you, and it makes it super easy to have these wonderful conversations. Thanks for being part of the Illuminate Project podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.
To carry on the conversation, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Illuminate Proj with an 8.
Switch your mindset, stay creative, and we challenge you to not just survive, but thrive in the status quo.